not just the languages, not just the licenses, not the projects that are in open source or the key projects that you might learn the functionality behind or even the legal rubrics that apply. But I think some aspect of the ethics and philosophy of open source really should be part of the undergraduate experience, because if you don't understand the responsibility that is inherent in engaging with open source and utilizing open source, that's what leads to the tragedy of the commons. That's what leads to maintainer burnout. That's what leads to people not understanding that they can't just take this stuff out of the ether and use it without giving back.
Well, technically they can, but...
Okay, yeah, you're right.
Well,
they can, but it's not a long-term sustainable approach. And I think that philosophy ought to be imbued in the next generation coming up.
Yeah, there are consequences to that decision.
Yes. Well, not to make us go down a rabbit hole, or maybe I do want to make us go down a rabbit hole, but apply that to the legislation that's been coming out, because in a sense that says, hey, if you want to use this stuff, you have some level of obligation, at least to your users, that you're sure that there's no vulnerabilities in this software, as one example, and actually advocating in legislation that if you make a fix to software that you're going to ship to your customer, you should give it back to the community from which you got it. Do you see that as being a method of moving along the ability for open source projects to have that ethos more in a regulatory form as opposed to an ethical or a philosophical form, actually having legislation that tries to say, the same types of things and buttress that ethical aspect with actual legislation?
That's a great point, Phil. I think cybersecurity may be a real driver for some of the reform that needs to happen across the open source ecosystem. The whole concept of software bill of materials, or SBOMs, really hit their stride about 4 years ago with President Biden's Executive Order 14028. And that piece of regulatory weight that was put out has spawned an entire ecosystem of its own around open source, led by Dr. Alan Friedman with the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency under the Department of Homeland Security, or CISA. That's on the US side. On the world stage, the European Union now has the EU Cyber Resilience Act that I think includes some of those things that you were just mentioning about looking at vulnerabilities and ensuring that you have some kind of responsibility for support and maintenance. That is bringing to the forefront this idea of that level of responsibility, at least to your end customers, if not to the broader ecosystem and community, but they may benefit from that as well.
Yeah, to my understanding, like the Cyber Resilience Act is going towards, if you have a vulnerability in the product that builds on an open source project and the vulnerability is present in that project, and you are like that product is obviously something that you make money on, then you as a company will be obligated to disclose and report that vulnerability to the open source community. And I don't know if like how far the legislation currently is and the next steps on how they are enforcing things. But I think there might be some obligation even on the lines of, if you have a fix, then you should also share that with the community, and whether that fix is what is getting merged and will actually fix the vulnerability or somebody else's, that I'm not sure. I don't think that matters at the end, but there is some notion towards both report the bug and take part in fixing it as well, which personally I am super happy to see a direction that puts the idea and has some enforcement around companies actually investing in open source. And one thing that I think communities need to also prepare for, that once this actually starts to happen, we already mentioned maintainer burnout. Now, I would love to see the problem where we have so many new companies and people showing up and reporting and trying to fix bugs that it's going to become like a big load for the maintainers. But on the other hand, any increase in load might result in, already busy maintainers burning out over time. So that's something that I think the communities will need to keep in mind, how to enable those people who show up, whether because they realized that what they were doing is not sustainable or they were incentivized by something like the CRA. So once they show up, that they're able to efficiently figure out what and how to do without becoming like, a big burden and source of conflict, and not conflict, but challenges on, we have all these new bugs and things, and now we don't know what to do as a community. And if I said anything that is not accurate, Ria, please correct me.
I think you've got a really good sense of the overall ecosystem and the push and pull, because there's just so many competing interests and so many areas where the sand is shifting under our feet that we're trying to figure out as we go along. You mentioned the EU CRA was passed last year, but those are just the bones of the framework. The standards bodies are now trying to put flesh on those bones of hammering out exactly how will this area be interpreted, what will be the specific requirements, who are you going to report to, what kind of infrastructure is going to be set up to handle all of this. So stay tuned. We live in interesting times.
We really do. As we keep saying, there's always something new to learn and figure out every single day in open source, which makes this area really interesting and kind of fun to be a part of, because you never get bored.
I think my tagline for open source is that it is simply endless learning. You are always learning something new in it. And I've been doing this now for off and on over 20 years, but the more I learn, it's unlocking the more I have to learn. There's always a new trove of information or procedure or process that you can layer into the mix to make it better.
Hopefully, I think you phrased it really well, Ria, in saying that let's hope that it is a good stepping stone to aiding in the maturity and the evolution of the interactions that happen between companies and the open source projects on which they rely, to really build a better partnership. Let's start with vulnerabilities, but let's see if we can take it further.